everybody, John Bornschein here, and this is Cable Lane. I want to welcome you back to our series, Experiencing God Day by Day by Dr. Henry Blackaby. In today's study, he's entitled it, No One Can Prevent You. Now listen to this. It's taken from Numbers chapter 14. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive of the men who went to spy out the land. Now, we need some proper context in that. In fact, if you go to Numbers chapter 13 and you're looking at your scripture here, you find out that these two young men, Joshua and Caleb, were selected ultimately by God to be spies who would go into the promised land and then bring back a report. Well, along with the other spies, they do come back and they report of how full the land is, flowing with milk and honey. It was the blessing that God had promised them, but it was also filled with great adversaries, giants, people that were very intimidating for the other spies. And they come back, report on what they had seen. And in chapter 14, verse 1, ultimately, what you find is Israel is crying out to God. They're lamenting and weeping and wanting to go back to Egypt. But it's Joshua and Caleb who are wanting to stay the course. God has promised this. And you go to verse 4 of chapter 14, and here's what it says. So they said to one another, "Let us select a leader and return to Egypt." Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. But Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, "The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." Of course, we find that Moses has to then intercede for the people. They're still in a state of rebellion. And then ultimately we find that God is angry with the people because they're refusing to relent. They're refusing to be obedient, and their heart is set on going back to Egypt. And then we skip over here to verse 33. "And your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and bear the brunt of your infidelity until the carcasses are consumed in the wilderness. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years, and you shall know my rejection. I, the Lord, have spoken this. I will surely do so to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be consumed, and there they shall die." Now the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation complain against him by bringing a bad report of the land, those very men who brought the evil report about the land died by the plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive of the men who went to spy out the land. So you can see why Dr. Henry Blackaby directed our attention to that particular key verse. These men remained alive. Why? Because they were faithful unto the Lord. Now, they should have gone right in and taken possession of the land, but here, because of the disobedience of others, they were now relegated to spend the next 40 years in the wilderness. The point of this particular study is this. Do you ever feel that the will of God is being thwarted somehow in your life? That other people are somehow getting in the way, that there's perhaps a boss who is the one who's now in charge of your well-being, or your climbing the ladder of success at a company is preventing you somehow from taking the next promotion, or that somehow a family member is preventing you from growing in the knowledge and understanding of the Lord, or moving to another successful plane, whatever that might be. You may feel that somehow, some way, other people in their actions and their disobedient behaviors are preventing God from using you, or the potential that could come out of you in glory and service to God. And it can be very frustrating when we feel that others are stifling our advancements. And then we have to find ourselves in a proper position of prayer, because it's not really their role or their behavior that's stifling anything. Nothing can stifle the plans of God that He has for you. God had always planned for Joshua and Caleb to go into the promised land as leaders of Israel at exactly the time that He had appointed. It looked like a 40-year delay, but it exactly was on time for what God had ultimately purposed. To us, it may look like something is being hindered. To us, it may look like something's being delayed. To us, it may look like God's blessings are not being poured out because of another person's sin, but rather God is working all things to the good of those who love Him, who are called according to His purposes. He is working in His perfect timing and way, and we must trust Him. Let me give you some other examples. Recently, we were talking about what happened in Acts chapter 9, verses 36 to 43, in which Peter, who happened to be near Joppa, will go over to see Dorcas, who's also named Tabitha. She had recently died. And this was completely shocking to the people who were there. She was faithfully serving the Lord. And so they call on Peter to come to the place where her body was. He prays, and she comes to life again. It's an amazing story. But ultimately, what we see at the end of those verses is that it was all for the advancement of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yes, we could say, well, look at the wonderful miracle that happened with Tabitha coming back to life again, but ultimately it was for a greater mission and purpose to happen at the exact timing that God had appointed it. So even in death, Tabitha was being used by God to advance His gospel message. Her being raised to life was a testimony then to God's working through Peter. It empowered the message through Peter's lips, and ultimately people were saved. That was the point. But for us, we would say, God, why would you take her life? What happened? This was not the plan. And we failed to see that there was a greater plan working all along. Let me give you another example. In 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 20 to 22, we find that there's a man who dies, and as they're burying this man, they throw his body in this pit, and his body lands on the body of Elisha, and he comes back to life again. Now, why is that so significant? Well, if you go back to 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 9, we find that Elisha had asked for a double portion of everything that God had given to Elijah. Elisha had asked that the Lord would do double through his ministry to bring God the glory. And so we see that Elijah was privileged by God, given the wonderful working of God to be a conduit through him to raise someone from the dead. Well, Elisha also had raised someone from the dead, but that's one for one. Elisha hadn't yet raised another person from the dead. So when Elisha dies, then someone else's body touches his body and that person came to life again. So God was still using Elisha even after he died to fulfill His promises. How often we would have given up on God and thinking, well, He's just forgotten His promises. I got a double portion of everything here, but not here. So that's a broken promise. And not saying that God is working through all space and time, and these are no barriers to God at all. He is still going to use you to advance His glorious kingdom work. And that, brothers and sisters, is what we ought to pray. We ought to pray, Lord, advance your kingdom through your lowly servant, through me, your servant whom you have called before the foundations of the earth, formed me with your very hands. Bring yourself glory. Bring glory to the Son through my life. That's what we ought to pray. And we see that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 1. Let me conclude with these powerful words from Dr. Blackaby. He says, no one can hinder God from carrying out His plans for your life. Once God sets something in motion, no one can stop it. I hope you've been encouraged, brothers and sisters. Do not grow discouraged. Do not be dismayed. God has the perfect timing, and He will advance His purposes through your life. Just be the willing servant. Put yourself on the altar where you say, Lord, thy will be done. I am here to glorify you, and you, O Lord, receive all the praise through every breath of my body. To Him be the glory forevermore. God bless you, my friends. Take care.